All right, everyone. I want to officially welcome you to today's Work from Home Wednesday. Our topic today is finding serendipity in remote work. I'm your presenter, as always, Dave Collins, CEO of Oak and Reeds. And today's workshop is, like I mentioned earlier, going to be a little different. I'm going to be presenting some research, some work I've been doing both in my past as a workplace strategist and some of the information that I typically like to talk about, which is how can you continue to build skills that are helpful for your professional life while you are working remotely and working in a distributed way. Today's workshop, I'm going to actually be posing more questions than answers. I have some answers and ideas at the end, but what we're trying to tackle right now is this idea of how do we continue to have serendipitous interactions, these accidental collisions and bumping into each other that all of the research shows in the workplace is what generates interesting, exciting, novel collaborations. How do we continue to have those accidental encounters when we quite literally can no longer physically be around each other? And how can we do that while we are solo working from home? I have some thoughts. I want to definitely hear your thoughts. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the workshop. So, as always, today's workshop is sponsored by Oak and Reeds. That's my company. We do interactive soft skills trainings. We do all of our workshops virtually, and we cover concepts like collaboration skills, communication skills, virtual interaction, using virtual tools, also down to basic manager skills like providing feedback and coaching and dealing with conflict, all while doing those things virtually. So if you want to learn more, please email me. I'll give my contact information at the end. Would love to talk to you about doing some work with your team. We've done a lot of work with a lot of awesome clients. So regardless of where you are, one of the interesting benefits now is it's quite easy for me to do a workshop with anyone, anywhere in the world, honestly at any time, as long as I can wake up and have coffee. But what we're about to do today is we're going to cover a variety of topics that are near and dear to my heart because they go back to my history where I started my consulting career as a workplace strategist. And I'll get into what that means in a moment. We're going to start today's workshop looking at the state of the open plan office. The open plan office is a hot topic and has been for years. The idea of having an open space, being able to see each other, being able to interact and connect. It's something that we are now starting to deal with from a safety perspective, which has always been a discussion. We're going to talk about what we know, kind of the core tenets of workplace strategy, and how some of those things are now coming in conflict with workplace safety. Then we're going to talk about distributed working, which is a term which basically means working from a variety of locations, in the office, at home, and also third spaces. And talking about how this might be a more common approach as we start to transition back to in-person work, but we're still not fully back to in-person work. This intermediate time is going to be a really interesting time to look at what distributed work looks like in 2020. Then we're in the second half, we're going to talk about the big issue at stake, which is how do we continue to spark serendipitous interactions, which are one of the core, most important parts about in-person working, these accidental encounters where we meet someone in a different department, we discover a connection, and we have a new way of approaching our work. How can we do this when we are not going to be bumping into each other because of requirements and safety? How can we continue to still have that spark? And I'm going to present some of my own ideas at the end of this about how we can continue to generate these accidental creative collisions while we're either working virtually or we're working in person in this transition period when we're simply not going to be seeing or we're not going to be nearby a whole lot of our coworkers due to safety reasons. Again, some ideas. I definitely want to hear your ideas on how you're dealing with a lot of these, because I think what I love about these webinars is in the chat box, people sharing how they've responded to these shared challenges. And again, as you're using the chat box, if you'd like to, make sure that that blue box says you're sharing your message with all attendees. That way we can all join in the conversation. Sometimes it just sends it to me, which is great, but I want to make sure everyone can see. So let's jump in with our first topic, which is the state of the open plan office. And I want to give a brief 2-minute rundown of the history of workplace strategy, which is essentially the history of how offices have been designed and laid out. I used to work for a company called DEGW, which is founded by a group of people led by a man named Frank Duffy. He's one of the forefathers of workplace strategy. And this kind of started in Germany in the late 60s, where there was a look at how can we make offices fit this new economy, this new knowledge economy that we're all moving towards in the late 20th century. And the term that was developed then was called Bürolandschaft, which is a phenomenal German word, which basically means office landscaping. So it's this whole new school of thought that business leaders and architects and designers were all coming together to figure out how can we make the physical office match the type of work that we're doing. And so this is one of the earliest attempts at that, which was basically a German office, an Osram Munich office, where you can see they've started to circle these different groupings of teams. And this is not your traditional layout. You can see it's kind of mushed together. Some of these desks are a little cockeyed. There's different opportunities for collaboration in each of these groupings. So what they're trying to do is kind of map this idea of almost office sociology to look at how can the layout of desks and tables suit the groupings of teams. How can we make sure these groupings are next to the teams that they work with? They're far away from the teams that are disruptive, either due to noise or maybe privacy concerns. And so really starting to think about, again, I love the term office landscaping. How can we make our offices more conducive to fit the type of work we do and the types of collaboration we do? So again, speeding ahead, I'm going to look at, one of the big firms that looks at workplace design, workplace strategy. Some of the big takeaways from workplace strategy now in the year 2020, I take from Genzlers' Workplace Survey, which we're going to put that link in the chat right now. Really good document, all publicly available. And this is, again, kind of summarizing the lessons learned about workplace design. We know that well-designed workplaces have benefits. And when I was a consultant, we would always kind of talk about these benefits as the reason to take some time to look at how your workplace is designed. But in a nutshell, because we're speeding through this quick 101 version of what workplace strategy has taught us, when you have a well-designed workplace, a high-performing workplace, there's a lot of great benefits. Employees, will talk about their company in general, not just about the workplace, but talk about why they like working at their company in a much more positive light. So think about Glassdoor, think about posting on LinkedIn, more of that. You think about research, and this is all research-based. So people find they're more excited about experimenting with new ways of working. Think about the new way of working we just have all experienced, working from home. People are more interested in trying out new ways, new habits. People are also more aware, both with self-report and observational surveys. They're more aware of what people in their organization are doing because there's more sharing. People are just generally more engaged. So you think about your employee engagement surveys, those always track in line with well-designed workplaces. People, in terms of just plain old job satisfaction, the workplace has a whole lot to do with that, right? So high-performing workplaces, well-designed workplaces lead to satisfied employees. And ultimately think about recruiting and talent, more likely to recommend their company as a place to work, right? And so TLDR, people like working from nice offices, right? I think we all know this intuitively, but there's research to back all of this up. And if you want to read that workplace survey, I highly recommend it because they look at how the connection between well-designed workplaces relates to all of these satisfaction metrics, right? So really important to think about. This stuff matters. And it matters not just because we like having a nice office, it matters because we talk about our work in a more positive way. To go along with that, again, from that research report, if we're thinking about working from home, when you have a poorly designed workplace, you can see here on the left panel, these green bars, poorly designed workplaces mean people prefer to work from home, whereas more highly designed, more well-designed workplaces, people actually prefer to work in the office than at home. So if you think about it, a lot of what we're experiencing right now, whether you're enjoying or really embracing this work from home moment, probably has a fair amount to do with how well you were able to work in your office. If you were frustrated with booking conference rooms, frustrated with finding time and space to get solo focused work previously, you may actually be enjoying the work from home experience more. It has less to do with how well you're set up at home, and actually a lot to do with how good and how supportive your physical office was before. So again, kind of a flip to some of the thinking we've been looking at now is you can only do so much with your at-home workspace, and a lot of your perception has to do with what you're comparing it with, right? So it's kind of an interesting data point there. And finally, another great workplace strategy firm, again, we're kind of looking at the big takeaways about what we know about the office. JLL releases an occupancy survey every year. And we're going to put that link in the chat as well if you want to read that. The key thing you want to know, and this is going to get us into our idea around safety right now, one of the most important metrics for any workplace is this idea of utilization. And basically, you can read the definition here. Utilization is simply how much of our space is being used at any one time. And it's sort of the grand metric of workplace strategy that we're always trying to think about: how can we better utilize our offices? How can we make use of more spaces for more of the time? So we're not wasting space. We're not wasting empty desks. We're not wasting real estate. We're kind of trying to increase this idea of density, which we're going to get to right now is a little bit counterintuitive right now. And the big takeaway is that most offices are pretty underutilized. We look at these utilization rates overall across industries, across regions. In North America, the average utilization rate for offices is about 60%. So what that means is that basically 40% of our spaces go unused. Open conference rooms, open desks, common spaces with no one in them. There's a variety of ways to measure this, but really, when you think about it, it's 40% real estate waste. And now we wouldn't ever want to go to 100% utilization, because that's basically, you could never book a conference room. You could never find an open space to sit down. But 60% is almost close to half the time people aren't using the spaces in our offices, right? So this has both good and bad benefits for where we are right now. We'll get to that in a moment. Part of these takeaways I wanted to talk to you about with the open plan office is, the two big things are most offices are generally pretty empty. And also the more well-designed your office is, the better the impact is on the actual work you're doing. And so one of the big takeaways from those findings is this idea of let's go to a distributed work environment. And part of that is due to the fact that we now have the ability to not necessarily just have to work at home or in the office. We have this ability with technology to work from a variety of places, right? So I want to show this video right now that shows kind of this transformation of the desk, which I really like it because it shows just how far we've come over the years. And so what I'm gonna do right now is share my screen a little bit differently and show this quick video. All right, so hopefully you can see that video. And I'm gonna go ahead and play this, basically looking at how the desk has changed over the years relative to how technology has helped us out. So I love that video. And again, we'll put the link into that video into the chat if you want to share it around. I love that video because it shows that basically everything we need is in our laptop, right? Everything we need to do our work by ourselves is in our laptop. What's missing, and that's made this transition to remote work logistically, probably not the hardest thing in the world. Obviously there are exceptions. The thing we're missing are the people. And so part of this looks at this idea of distributed work. Why is distributed work something we want to think about as we are transitioning and in this intermediate time? So Sue Whitnum, who worked at DEGW in our Australia office back when I was there, wrote a really good post on LinkedIn that connects these dots together. And we'll put that link in the chat right now if you want to read the full post, which I highly recommend. So distributed work, I'm going to read straight from her article. The good news is that many organizations have already developed hybrids of work and home as part of a flexible workplace program. The lessons learned from these leaders will help everyone orchestrate the next normal. Distributed workplaces don't assume that everyone is in the office all the time. So teams find their own ways to stay connected and be productive through the week. And people in those teams relish the time at home. Now we're on a fast track to a much wider adoption of this approach, and it will have significant impact on the amount of space we need in the office and the kinds of work settings we'll look for closer to home. We shouldn't aim to snap back. We need a more sustainable way of working. And what we're talking about here with this distributed work is we're going to have to do some of our work at home. We're going to have to do some of our work in the office. And we may even be doing some of our work in what are called, third spaces, which traditionally have been cafes, libraries, parks, wherever you kind of pull your laptop up and do some work outside of those home and office locations. And we're going to have to start being really intentional about what work we do where. So classically, a remote working program is about doing our solo work at home and then coming into the office to collaborate because that's where people are. Now, it's going to be a little tricky if not everyone is in the office at all times and we can't get close to them. So how can we overcome some of these barriers while also still getting the benefits of distributed work, which is choice, getting to choose where you do your best work? So again, from that JLL survey, they talk about why do companies traditionally, and again, this came out in 2019, which feels like it's about 100 years ago. So traditionally, what were the benefits of distributed work, mobility program? All right, so essentially a mobility program, the short version of it is not assigning a desk to people and giving them more choice of where they work. And so the benefits were basically more flexible work culture. So more collaboration because people are moving around more in the office. We're saving costs because we're sharing spaces instead of assigning them. So we're reducing our real estate footprint. And ultimately, we're increasing that utilization rate. So we're going from 60% up to 70%, and we're using more of the spaces we already have, and less things are going unused. So those were the benefits, which all relate to density in the office and choice and more collaboration, more interaction with people. But it's really kind of difficult to do that right now. So before we get into some of the big questions we have to answer, I do want to open up a poll relative to this idea of distributed working. So I want to ask this question of the group, ideally, and thinking about the work you do now, how many days would you like to work from home? Right now, we're probably at 5 because we have to. But let's think ahead. How would we want to do that? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll right now. And go ahead and just answer this one question before we move along. I'm very curious to see what our audience would like to do. All right, a few more seconds here if you haven't had a chance to answer. I'm seeing some responses come in. All right, pretty much everyone's voted. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down and share the results. So really interesting. Most people want to work 2 or 3 days from home. Let's call it an average of 2.5 days from home, which to me, that's probably where I would put it for my work. I love having a couple days from home to catch up and then a couple days in client offices doing workshops. Now, part of distributed work is thinking about a strategy around, if I'm working from home 2 days a week, what do I need to do my best solo work at home? And then if I'm in the office 2 days a week, what will support me the best in terms of in the office? Because as we're going to see, only being in the office 2 days a week is probably going to be kind of a reality in the near future. So in many ways, we're closer to our goals around distributed work as we're transitioning out of this pandemic than maybe we were before, which is an opportunity. We'll keep talking about that. So when it comes to this idea of making the best use of in-person work time, we want to look towards this one goal of increasing and replacing the serendipity of serendipitous interactions, of accidental encounters of people in the office where we come together and bump together and have great ideas. So I want to zoom back a little bit and talk about why serendipity is such a goal for in-person work in the office. And it was kind of a trip going back and doing some research about some of the goals we had designing offices just 6-7 years ago. There's a great article from NPR looking at how Google designed their offices to increase the amount of casual interaction. And I'm going to read from that article right now. If you give me a moment to pull out my notes. Apologies here. I'm going to read from that article because it really goes to show how far we've come and what is so different about where we are today. So let me go ahead and reshare this. So in this article from NPR, the person from Google talks about why they designed their social spaces the way they did. Talking about the cafeteria. While the free food inside the cafeteria is a lot nicer than the fare at most universities, the tables might take you back. Actually, the tables' length and design look like those in high school cafeterias. Why? Because when you put them back to back, people walk down between the chairs, they bump into each other. It's actually called a Google bump. And you go, hey, and you sit down and talk, says John Sullivan, a management professor at SF State University and workplace consultant. Quote, Google has spent a lot of time studying what makes workplaces innovative, and casual interactions are important. Sullivan lists 3 factors to make that set companies apart: learning by interaction, collaborations, and fun. Most people don't get that, he says. And it goes on a little bit and says, the volleyball and frisbee, even the length of the lines inside the cafeteria, are designed to make sure Google employees talk to each other that they don't necessarily work with. Sullivan says they even measure the length of the cafeteria line. Quote, why? Because if there is no line, you won't talk to anyone, you won't interact. And if you look at this picture of a Google cafeteria, you see how the design forces people together. It forces people in close clumps at the dining tables. It forces people to scoot past people within a foot of each other to get deeper into the tables, causing more bumps. The line is long. They're clustered together. There's chit chat happening everywhere. Now, in a pre-COVID environment, this is great. This is kind of a workplace strategist's dream. So many opportunities for people to mix and match with each other in a social setting over food, where people have a moment to relax. Now, obviously, this can no longer exist in our intermediate state. There's so many opportunities here for disease transmission. This is certainly the opposite of social distancing. We go on. So another company with a phenomenal workplace is Zappos. They really take a lot of pride in the way their culture is driven by the physical office environment. And here's a quote from one of their leaders, Kathleen Joseph, who in 2014 was in charge of engagement. And she talks about, one of our focuses at Zappos is increasing the amount of collisions that our employees have with each other, because we believe that lots of great connections happen during those serendipitous interactions. This kind of open play allows for employees to break down whatever silos inherently occur when you have a company as rapidly growing as ours is. In addition to that, it's lots of fun and an opportunity to relieve stress through play. So again, going back to these themes, accidental interactions, the idea of stress reduction through play and casual social interactions. And as companies grow, it's a way for informal structures to be broken and rebuilt as employees from different teams and different silos run into each other, talk about something, and solve problems through informal channels. This is all part of the benefits of in-person serendipitous interactions. And so another article, again, I did a ton of research this week. I had a blast doing it. A great article on this idea of productivity from an author named Rodolphe Dutel. We'll put the link in the chat. When we talk about serendipity, he has a great quote. Following a routine feels like an anchor point for productivity, and serendipity is best found when I venture out of this anchor point. So how do we break some of these patterns to allow serendipitous interactions to help enrich our work environment and inject new ideas that we would not have expected? And serendipity is this really amorphous term. And part of this article, what I really like, is it breaks down what is necessary for serendipitous interactions to occur. And he lists this quote again in the article. Take a look. There are 3 critical necessary conditions for a serendipitous interaction. You know, first, you need to have some learning, some ideas, some insights, some networks, some sort of raw material of something to talk about, right? Then you need behavior. You need curious people that are excited about learning. They need people who are excited about sharing. That has to be a norm or maybe a value in your organization, that you have not only the time to learn new things, but also the interest in sharing them with your colleagues. Finally, there needs to be stimulation. That's where the workplace, the built environment comes in. There has to be designs of how people in hallways run into each other, or little nooks where people grab coffee and accidentally run into a colleague they haven't seen in a couple of months, right? That's where those collisions come in. So it's both people and external environment that create the conditions for serendipitous bumps to occur. How do we make those same stimulations happen when we are remote, or when only 20% of our office can be in the office at any one time? These are the big questions we're trying to figure out right now. So I've got some ideas. All right. So luckily, I'm not just leaving you with a bunch of questions. Part of my research is showing, like, what are we going to do as we're transitioning back into the office to make sure we can replace and generate the necessary physical requirements for bumps, but doing it in a safe way. Hard balance to strike. So great quote that I was reading as part of this research is, you know, I'm out of the prediction business. I don't want to make predictions. In fact, that's just me. I'm just saying that right now. So I don't want this to go over as me making predictions about what the future of work will look like, because just like you, I can barely predict what next week will look like. But there's some major trends that I think we can look at and start to think, does this factor into my life? Is this something maybe we should think about for our business, for our team? That's how I want to present this, because I would hate to look back on this presentation 6 months from now and I'm going to get a lot of stuff wrong. So when we think about the challenge, I want to boil it down to this. Accidental gatherings are now the enemy. That's what social distancing is trying to prevent. Accidental bumps where disease can be transmitted unknowingly. So social distancing at work is going to have to be something we contend with for at least the near to mid to long-term future, right? That's not going away. So we're thinking about what are some of the examples of how social distancing is going to reduce the opportunities for those bumps to happen, for that physical environment to help us accidentally interact. We may be seeing things like one-way hallways, right? Where people don't go 2 ways and don't run into each other. Closing some of our smallest conference rooms for groups of 2 to 3, they're too tight. We're going to see things like leaving desks open, leaving a desk open in between in lieu of, completely changing our furniture layout. That's going to be really expensive. In the meantime, we're probably just going to have to leave blank spots, right? Lowering our utilization. We're going to be seeing things like limiting the number of people who could be in elevators, one at a time. Same with, staggering arrival times, exit times, staggering what days people are allowed in the office, which again, if we only want to be in the office 2 days a week, like we just talked about in that poll, not necessarily awful, but we're going to have to rethink what happens in those 2 days. And also closing communal spaces, right? Closing that Google cafeteria, closing our coffee corner where everyone grabs coffee, everyone grabs the coffee pot, right? 50 hands on that every day. That's probably not going to be allowed. Some of the solutions we're looking at right now, this is from Cushman and Wakefield. This is from an article in Wall Street Journal, which we'll post right now. This is a design they're looking at called the 6-foot office, right? Looks kind of like a normal office, but you can see there are some glass panels in between the desks where the monitors are. There's a lot less density here. So you can see there's a lot of space. There's hand sanitizer on each desk. There's only about 8 people in here, whereas previously we would want to get a whole lot more folks in this corner of the office to increase the density, increase the buzz, increase the amount of opportunity for interaction, right? So where does this leave us? Previously, our main strategy was to increase density, right? For 2 reasons: reduce costs and increase our collaboration, increase the amount of bumps people would have in the office to make that really rich interaction, really rich amount of accidental idea exchange. Unfortunately, our goal now is the opposite. Our goal is to reduce density in the office, right? Mainly for safety, right? We're not reducing density because it's saving us money or it's making the office experience better. We have to reduce the risk of virus transmission in the office, which when we think about it, when one person gets sick in an office, there's so much density, there's so much shared usage of materials and ideas and materials and spaces and tools, high risk there. So what are some of the questions that come out of that? If we're changing our goal with the workplace, what are some of the answers we need to come up with? How do we increase collaboration while decreasing in-person density? So how are we going to replace shared lunches, shared coffee, shared happy hours, right? Snack bars. How do we replace the collaboration that occurs when we share a meal together, right? That's an inherently social exercise. What's going to replace that? What happens to those tiny little phone booths where we have our calls that everyone comes in and out and shares, right? Where can we take loud phone conversations? Think of the increase in Zoom meetings that are still going to occur in person in the office. Where are we going to support those calls, which are very disruptive if you take them at a desk with the speaker on and everyone around you? How do we do that? In general, is the office going to be a quiet place for solo heads down work? Or is it going to be really loud because we want to replace the socialization that we haven't had a chance to do for months? I don't know. Are there different spaces in the office that are quiet and loud? What's our commute going to look like? What does rush hour look like? If everyone is staggering when they come into the office, is rush hour going to be easier? Will it be more stressful? Certainly in the short term. Simply, what does that commute look like? Where are these third spaces going to look? Right? Will you still be able to go into a Starbucks to get some heads down time across the street from your office, or go grab coffee with someone to have a more personal discussion that you want to take away from your colleagues? Where are those third spaces? What do those look like? Will we need to have those in the building itself to keep them safe? Will we end up taking them to parks or outdoor spaces where there's less risk of transmission? What does that look like? How do we replace a whiteboard session or brainstorming with sticky notes? If we can't touch the same physical objects, how do we get that same tactile feel of getting up and sharing a whiteboarding, coming up with ideas together, moving sticky notes around, other physical items, physical totems that help us make our work more tactile, especially if we're knowledge workers? What replaces those? And how do we have private one-on-one conversations? Are we going to have to take those outside? Can we still have a one-on-one conversation in what was previously a 10-person conference room in order to keep that distancing? How is that going to affect our utilization? Are we going to really, can we afford to have 2 people in a giant conference room if they want to have a private conversation at the office, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to these things, but these are the things we're going to have to decide as we think about collaboration in this return. So here are some ideas. I would love to hear what you think of these ideas. These are just the beginning of some ways to generate collisions, to create the necessary conditions for serendipitous bumps, right? While still being safe. So one way is to take our commutes, especially while we're still working from home, reimagine them. Scheduling virtual coffees, scheduling virtual breakfasts, having agendaless meetings, where we're just connecting with people as we would when we grab coffee in the shared coffee machine. One way to add structure to those, because again, anytime we're doing something digitally or virtually, this is a constant theme in these webinars, we're going to have to add structure to make it happen. That's just a necessary evil of doing these things virtually online. Great Slack app called Donut, which you can add to your company's Slack, which essentially automatically pairs people up to have these little coffee conversations and helps facilitate the scheduling. Really useful. My clients have used this and love it. It's great in normal times for a way to kind of build in-person networks. And now you can use this for, again, existing people on a team to force them to have these accidental conversations about ideas they're thinking about. Another idea that I really liked is this idea of socially engineering collisions. So what that is anytime you're working on a project in your group, you may actually force people to say, okay, you've got what I think is a solution. I'm going to go ahead and make you ask someone in a completely unrelated department what they think of this idea, even though it has nothing to do with their role explicitly, as a way to essentially socially engineer the same type of conversation that would happen if someone from marketing and someone from data science just had lunch together because they're friends and they're just chatting about what's going on, what are you working on today, right? Force that to happen over email or over Slack to, again, just get people's casual observations about your work in a more socially engineered, a forced way. It takes little effort, but again, it's going to increase the amount of times that those ideas bump into each other with a little extra effort. Agendaless meetings, something we've talked about all the time. Having a 30-minute meeting to just talk about what's going on, right? You're going to have to add a little bit of unstructured conversation time to your meetings to allow some of these ideas to bubble up and kind of bounce them off of each other. Other things you can do are what are basically like accountability partners. So partnering with someone in your team to do things at home together. So trying out what's called the Pomodoro technique, which is basically a way to structure your day for more productivity and kind of short spurts. You can try that out with a colleague, and in reflecting on how that's working, it's just another opportunity to bump into someone virtually and reflect on an experience, a shared experience that could then lead into conversations around work. We've got some info on that. We'll put that in the chat. Partnering with people to have a midday workout, right? Put on your Zoom, do a virtual yoga class or a virtual Pilates class or a virtual HIIT class. Have 5 minutes at the end when you're both sweaty, just checking in on what's going on. Again, it's not the same, but you're doing a thing, you're connecting with someone and allowing sort of some of the non-work aspects of casual conversations to sneak into your workday. Or even just doing shared yoga or shared meditations during the day allows you to do something with someone that could spark an idea. Another idea is this idea of a visibility buddy, which is essentially someone in your organization, whether you make it public to everyone or not, that is there to amplify your contributions anytime you're in a shared meeting. So a lot of research has shown this is helpful for people of minority backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds in your company, whatever that may be for your company makeup, to basically have their voice amplified. It's the classic idea of, when someone shares an idea in a meeting and then someone else shares the same idea and that idea actually gets listened to, have someone in that meeting who's there to amplify your voice. It builds trust, it builds camaraderie, and it also increases some of the in-person solidarity that we're missing. Less about serendipity, but again, another way to replicate some of these in-person support techniques. And even down to just a shared lunch with your team, right? Everyone makes the same simple meal. You all gather around the computers, around the Zoom, cook together and eat together. Again, it's kind of clunky, but we have to try something, right? And then there's also the classic versions of mandatory fun. You've probably read 10 articles about this right now. Mandatory fun always has its downsides where someone doesn't want to do it. It's not everyone's idea of a cup of tea, the ropes course or the laser tag outing, taking a half day, but they can still help. So, some ideas that I like that are kind of new that maybe you haven't read about, have someone be the team DJ for the day, make a Spotify playlist that everyone can listen to at the same time and just kind of build that connection, something to react to together. You can do live games. So maybe you've played a Jackbox game where everyone is on their phone and you're kind of doing a shared social game. Or Code Names is one of my favorite ones that you can play over Zoom. There's a virtual board, very fun. Or maybe even developing your own little tournaments. I know when I worked in corporate world, we had ping pong tournaments, we had pool tournaments when we had those in the office. Have something you can play virtually and just set up a bracket for online games. Again, just another reason for people to bump into each other in a non-explicit work environment. Have a book club, movie club, TV club. Talk about the Michael Jordan documentary every Monday, right? Just reason to interact. Do your own Reddit AMA on Slack, right? Pick a person that day and let anyone ask them any question they want, within reason. And just have an excuse to kind of share some social things in a framework that works really well for celebrities and great thinkers. Why not have that for your own team? It's kind of fun. I really like that one. And another idea for generating collisions virtually is the idea of an unconference. And this is something I've experienced as part of the Applied Improv Network's annual conference, where some of the conference panel discussions or workshops are scheduled, but then they leave real big gaps, whole entire half days or a full day for what's called an unconference. You could do this with your team tomorrow because it doesn't take planning, it's just executing. Basically what it is, you gather a group of people and you spend the first hour allowing people to take 30 seconds to a minute to pitch an idea for a discussion group or a workshop. And then the group gets to then vote on which of those discussion groups or workshops are most interesting. You create a schedule right then and there, right? 9 to 10, we're going to talk about tech tools. 11 to 12, we're going to talk about ideas for social interaction. And then 2 to 3 p.m. is an interactive workshop where we're just going to play, online collaboration games. You generate the schedule for the conference, the internal conference, right then and there. And then you allow people to participate in whatever sessions they really are interested in. And what's cool is you can assign roles. Some person can be the MC. We can have panelists that get asked questions. You could even have people in charge of creating a virtual networking space. Like any conference, you have the panels, and then you have sort of that milling around area where the booths are. Maybe someone takes on ownership of that in a different Zoom room. You can create a virtual networking cocktail hour where people talk about what everyone experienced in all those virtual rooms and all those virtual discussions during the day, just like a real conference. And if you take a day out of your day out of your schedule to have one of these, what you're doing is just supercharging people's creativity because you're empowering people to generate a conference virtually out of scratch. And it's going to create some really interesting conversations. If you're doing it with your own team, maybe send out the schedule after you've developed it in the morning to your whole organization, invite people to join in those discussions, and use what's called the law of 2 feet, right? If something isn't interesting, feel free to leave. No one's obligated, but it empowers people to do interesting, creative ideas on the spot. Highly recommend Googling it. We're going to put a link in here about Unconferences. If you want to do more research, happy to talk about this. Really cool idea for generating these bumps. Finally, I'll leave you with this. The idea of bumps, casual interactions, serendipitous collaboration, it does bias itself towards a certain type of worker and a certain personality type. So introverts and extroverts deal with serendipitous interactions and unexpected ideas in different ways. In broad strokes, extroverts love this stuff. Extroverts love the Google cafeteria. They love the Zappos game day where they get to meet everyone and chat and chit chat and think on their feet and do all that. Introverts don't necessarily love that. And that's also not necessarily the best way for an introverted person to come up with creative new ideas. Sometimes the best creativity for that working style or that learning style is working by themselves. So there's research here, and we're going to put this in the chat. Great research article that looks at when and how is creative work best done. And what the research shows is that there's actually certain scenarios where the best scenario for creative work is someone working by themselves at home. And that allows more focus time. And for people who think creatively that way, that can actually be really beneficial, which means the current scenario we're in with remote work is actually maybe more creative for certain learners and working types than others. So I do want to acknowledge that. So there's this idea to create solo serendipity when we break from our routines, just our own individual routines. And what's cool about that is we can do that now. We can create openings in our schedule to break from our routine, allow our brains to process some of the things we've been noodling on and reading, and make those connections just in our own heads. So the big idea is, how can we, right now, as we're still at home, how can we break from our routines to allow a newfound openness to new ideas, new approaches, new people, and new solutions? How can we allow the openness in our schedule to allow our brains to make those new combinations? So some ideas on that is simply blocking out time on your own calendar for reading, research, and just general unstructured idea exploration, breaking from your task to-do list routine. So creating breaks in your schedule, creating naps in the middle of the day for you to sleep on it for 20 minutes and allow your brain to reorganize some of your thoughts. Lots of research there and showing how sleep is so essential for creativity and that it allows us to kind of let our thoughts settle and make new connections. These breaks could be just forcing yourself outside to go on a walk and prompting yourself with a big question to reflect on in a new environment, outside in a park, walking around your block. That can be that serendipitous bump, but you're not bumping into a person, you're just bumping into a new routine and using stimulus that doesn't exist in your own home work environment. So again, we're not totally sunk, right? There are opportunities. If we go back to that definition of serendipity, it doesn't necessarily have to be bumping into a new person. It can be bumping into a new routine with new external stimulus, as long as we allow that time in our schedule. That's a way we can do this on our own. And it doesn't require the in-person office, especially as the in-person office scenario is going to be very much in flux for the next however many months and potentially years. So I'll leave you there, right? I mean, I think hopefully I presented some big questions that you can talk about with your teams and some ideas that you can implement right away. Before we go to questions, I will give my classic offer to chat with you and your teams. So if you like what you learned today and you want to keep talking, let's keep talking. I'm offering a free 30-minute consultation for you and your leadership team to reach out and get some time with me to talk through how to apply some of the topics and ideas that I've been talking about on these webinars, how you can apply them and customize them to your team. So again, please reach out. I love having these conversations. I think Athena is going to put the link to that Calendly in the chat if you want to just book a time right off the bat, or you can email me. And again, my name's Dave Collins, and I'm going to make sure to answer questions. Not seeing any on there right now, but if you want to, feel free to ask that. Otherwise, before you go, we're going to be doing another one of these, and in 2 weeks on managing remote conflict. So we're going to kind of go back from the research and big ideas, and I'm going to give you some real specific tools and techniques to help you deal with conflict as it arises and deal with conflict when you're working remotely. So go ahead and sign up with that link. Athena's going to put the link to next 2 weeks from now webinar. Otherwise, please reach out if you have questions. I love chatting about this stuff. If you have thoughts, ideas, big questions you and your team are trying to think through, email me. Let's have a conversation. Otherwise, let's see if we have questions. All right. Looks like no questions. I must have answered everything. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And oh, we got one question. Will this be sent to us afterwards? The answer is yes. So we will be sharing this video, and we will be posting it on oakandreads.com, and also you'll be getting an email with the link as well. Looks like I've lost my Zoom bar. All right. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining today. I want to encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in 2 weeks at the next Work From Home Wednesday. Have a great rest of your day, and stay safe out there.